I hid my pregnancy from my ex. His cousin found out, and now he wants to be involved. I'm 26 now, but let's rewind a little. For years ago, I was living my best life in California. I was in grad school making friends, and honestly, I thought I had my future all mapped out. That's when I met Jeff. He was this tall, goofy guy with a sarcastic sense of humor that just clicked with me. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, and within a few weeks, we were inseparable. Fast forward 4 years, and I really thought he was it for me. Like, the one. We talked about the future, marriage, kids, the whole package. Or, at least I thought we were on the same page. Turns out, Jeff had some, let's call them hidden reservations. Last year, completely out of the blue, he sat me down and basically said he wasn't ready for all that serious stuff. Marriage? Scary. Kids? Terrifying. He wasn't even sure if he wanted kids. I remember sitting there, my mouth hanging open like a cartoon character, because we'd literally been planning trips to look at houses together. Anyway, long story short, he broke it off. I was heartbroken, obviously, but I'm not the type to beg someone to stay. If you don't want to be here, then go. Still, it hurt. A lot. And to make it worse, a month later, I found out he'd started dating this girl named Grace. You know that feeling when you see someone you love move on so fast? Yeah, it's like someone punched me in the stomach. But here's the kicker. A few months after they started dating, Jeff and Grace broke up. And, well, Jeff reached out to me. I know. Bad decision alert, right? But I wasn't over him. And when he called, saying he missed me and wanted to see me, I caved. One thing led to another, and we hooked up. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was him realizing he made a mistake and wanted to fix things. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. A week later, he told me he decided to get back together with Grace. And then came the cherry on top. He asked me not to contact him anymore. I wish I could say I told him to shove it right then and there, but I didn't. I cried. I felt stupid. And I blocked his number because I didn't want to be tempted to text him. I also deleted all my social media accounts because I couldn't deal with the idea of seeing them together. It was like ripping off a Band-Aid while someone poured lemon juice on the wound, but I figured it was the only way I could move on. Or so I thought. So, fast forward a couple of months after the whole Jeff and Grace thing. I had moved back to my hometown in Oregon to be closer to my family. It wasn't exactly part of the plan I'd had for my life, but honestly, I needed the reset. California was just full of memories I didn't want to deal with, and I figured a change of scenery would help me heal. Then one morning, I woke up feeling absolutely awful. Like, I thought I had food poisoning or the flu or something. I couldn't keep anything down. I was exhausted all the time, and my emotions were all over the place. My mom joked that I might be pregnant, and we both laughed it off until I realized my period was late. Like really late. Cue me panic buying a pregnancy test from the pharmacy and pacing in the bathroom like a lunatic. And then there was that little pink plus sign. I think I just stared at it for 10 minutes straight, waiting for it to disappear like it was some kind of cruel joke. Spoiler, it didn't disappear. I like to say I handled it calmly and maturely, but nope. I sat on the bathroom floor, ugly, crying for what felt like hours. It wasn't that I didn't want kids. I've always wanted to be a mom someday. But this was not how I pictured it happening. I was 26, single, living in my childhood bedroom, and oh yeah, the father of my baby was happily back with his ex. After a few days of full-blown panic, I pulled myself together. I decided that I was going to do this on my own. I mean, women have been doing this forever, right? I didn't need Jeff to swoop in and save the day. He'd made his choice, and I wasn't about to beg him to be involved. So, I deleted the last traces of him from my life. Photos, messages, everything. I told myself that if he didn't want to be a dad, I'd be fine. I'd figure it out. A few months later, one of my best friends from California invited me to her engagement party. I was hesitant at first. I was starting to show, and I wasn't ready to explain my situation to everyone. But I also didn't want to miss her big moment. So I threw on a flowy dress that sort of hid my bump, and I went. Of course, that's where things took a turn. The party was beautiful. String lights, a live band, the whole Pinterest-worthy setup. I was sipping on sparkling water, trying to blend in, when I heard this voice behind me go, "Oh my God, is that you?" I turned around, and there was Tanya, Jeff's cousin. Jeff's very chatty cousin. My heart sank. I hadn't seen Tanya in over a year, but she was the kind of person who could sniff out drama from a mile away. We hugged, did the awkward small talk thing, and then her eyes dropped to my stomach. I could see the gears turning in her head. "Are you?" she started to ask, and I just nodded because what was the point in lying? She didn't say much after that, but I could tell she was dying to. And sure enough, a few days later, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Jeff. Can we talk?" I swear, I almost threw my phone across the room. I hadn't heard from him in months, and now he wanted to talk. I ignored it at first, but he kept texting, saying Tanya had told him I was pregnant and he needed to see me. Part of me wanted to tell him to go screw himself, but another part of me, probably the hormonal emotional part, felt like I owed him at least some kind of explanation. Eventually, I agreed to meet him, but on one condition. It had to be on neutral ground. No private, emotional one-on-one. So, he invited me to his parents' house, saying they wanted to see me too. I didn't love the idea, but I figured it'd be less intense with other people around. What I didn't know was that Grace would be there too. So, the day of the meeting rolls around, and I was an absolute mess. My stomach was in knots, not just because of the pregnancy, but because I had no idea what was waiting for me. Jeff's parents had always been nice to me when we were dating, but this wasn't exactly a casual catch-up. Plus, the Grace factor? Yeah, that was a surprise I wasn't emotionally prepared for. When I pulled up to their house, I actually sat in the car for a good 5 minutes, psyching myself up. "You've got this," I whispered to myself, even though I very much did not feel like I had this. Eventually, I forced myself out of the car, waddled up to the front door, and rang the bell. Jeff opened the door, and let me tell you, the look on his face was a lot. It wasn't just shock, it was this mix of guilt, panic, and something else I couldn't quite place. He stared at my belly for a second too long, and I had this overwhelming urge to cover it with my hands, like I could somehow hide the very obvious reason we were there. Instead, I just said, "Hi," and walked in before he could say anything. The living room was packed. His parents were there, smiling awkwardly like they didn't know how to act. And then there was Grace, sitting on the couch with her arms crossed so tightly, it looked like she was holding herself together with duct tape. I swear, the air in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. I wanted to turn around and run, but I was already in too deep. Jeff's mom was the first to break the silence. "It's so good to see you, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a hug. "We've missed you." I smiled politely, but I could feel Grace's eyes boring into me the entire time. I didn't even have to look at her to know she was fuming. Jeff finally cleared his throat and gestured toward the couch. "Can we sit and talk?" he asked, his voice all soft and careful, like I was some kind of fragile object that might shatter at any moment. I sat down, keeping as much distance between me and Grace as possible. She didn't say a word, but her body language was screaming loud enough for the both of us. Jeff sat next to her, and for a second, he just stared at me. So he finally said, "Tanya told me you're pregnant." "Yep," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "I am." "And it's mine?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. That was it. That was the moment I snapped. I'd been holding it together pretty well up until that point, but the sheer audacity of that question sent me over the edge. "Are you serious?" I shot back, narrowing my eyes at him. "Of course it's yours. Who else would it be?" Jeff's face turned about 3 shades of red, and his mom let out this little gasp, but I didn't care. I mean, really? After everything, that's what he wanted to lead with? Grace, meanwhile, was gripping the armrest of the couch like her life depended on it. "Jeff," she said through clenched teeth, "can I talk to you? Alone?" Jeff looked torn, glancing between me and Grace. But before he could respond, I stood up. "You know what? This was a mistake," I said, heading for the door. "I don't need this drama right now." Jeff practically tripped over himself trying to stop me. Wait, please don't go," he said, stepping in front of me. I didn't know, okay? I didn't know how to handle this." "Yeah, well, you're not exactly handling it great now," I shot back, crossing my arms over my chest. "I told myself I could do this on my own, and I can. I don't need you swooping in to play hero just because Tanya guilt-tripped you into showing up." He flinched at that, but before he could say anything, Grace exploded. "Oh, this is just great," she snapped, standing up and glaring at him. "You're really going to stand here and act like you want to be involved now? You can't even make up your mind about us, Jeff, and now you're going to play daddy to her kid. Okay, ouch. I mean, I knew she was pissed, but wow. Jeff spun around to face her. Grace, this isn't about us right now, he said, his voice firm for the first time all evening. This is about the baby. The baby, she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Yes, sure, Jeff. Let's just pretend that you running back to her while we were broken up didn't completely screw everything up. And that's when I decided I'd had enough. You know what? This isn't my problem, I said, grabbing my bag. You two can figure out whatever this is without me. Jeff tried to stop me again, but I was done. The whole situation was a mess, and I wasn't about to stand there and let them drag me into their drama any further. I got in my car and drove off, tears streaming down my face the entire way home. After I left Jeff's parents' house, I pretty much went straight home, locked myself in my room, and ugly cried into a pint of Ben & Jerry's. I was mad at Jeff, mad at Grace, mad at myself for even agreeing to that ridiculous meeting. But most of all, I was just exhausted. For the next few days, I ignored every single text and call from Jeff. He was relentless, apologies, explanations, even a couple of long, rambling voicemails where he tried to convince me that he just wanted to do the right thing. I wasn't ready to deal with any of it, so I let it all sit there unanswered. Honestly, I didn't know what I wanted. Did I want him to be involved? Did I want him to just go away? It was all so overwhelming. And then, about a week after that whole disaster, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Hey, it's Grace. Can we talk? I swear I almost dropped my phone. Of all the people I expected to hear from, she was dead last on the list. My first instinct was to delete the message and pretend I hadn't seen it, but curiosity got the better of me. I mean, what could she possibly want to say to me? After about 20 minutes of staring at the screen, I finally replied with, sure. We met at a coffee shop in town the next day. I showed up fully prepared for a fight. I had my defenses up, ready for her to throw shade or try to blame me for the mess her relationship was in. But when she walked in, she didn't look angry. She looked tired, like emotionally drained. I could relate. She sat down across from me, stared at her coffee for a solid minute, and then said, I just wanted to apologize. That threw me for a loop. Apologize? I repeated, because I wasn't sure I'd heard her right. She nodded, still not looking at me. For the way I acted the other day. For everything, really. I've been so focused on trying to keep Jeff that I didn't stop to think about how hard this must be for you. I didn't know what to say. I mean, yeah, she'd been kind of awful at Jeff's parents' house, but I hadn't exactly been a saint either. It's fine, I said awkwardly. I get it. This whole situation is a mess. That got a small laugh out of her. Yeah, that's one way to put it. She finally looked up at me, and her expression was softer than I'd ever seen it. For what it's worth, I don't think Jeff handled any of this well. But he's not a bad guy. He's just scared. I raised an eyebrow at that. Scared of what? Being a dad? Because, I mean, that ship has kind of sailed. She shook her head. Not just that. He's scared of screwing up, of not being good enough. He's had these walls up for as long as I've known him. And I think he pushed you away because he couldn't deal with the idea of failing you, or the baby. It took me a minute to process that. I mean, I'd spent so much time being angry at Jeff that I never really stopped to think about why he'd acted the way he did. It didn't excuse his behavior, but it did explain a few things. Grace took a deep breath and stood up. Anyway, I just wanted to say my piece. I think you and Jeff need to figure out what's best for the baby, and I'm not going to stand in the way of that anymore. We broke up, by the way. I figured you should know. I blinked at her, completely stunned. You broke up? Yeah. She gave me a small, bittersweet smile. I think we both realized we were holding on to something that wasn't really working. It's for the best. And with that, she walked out, leaving me sitting there with my overpriced decaf latte and about 1,000,000 thoughts swirling in my head. After that, things started to shift. Jeff kept reaching out, and eventually, I caved and answered one of his calls. He apologized, like really apologized, for how he'd handled everything. He admitted that he'd broken up with me not because he didn't want to marry me, but because the idea of being a husband and a father had freaked him out. I was a coward, he said. I thought I was doing the right thing by letting you go, but I was just running away. I didn't let him off the hook right away. It wasn't like an apology was going to magically fix everything. But I could tell he was serious about wanting to be involved. We started talking more little by little, and I could see him trying to step up. He'd call every day to check in, asking how I was feeling, how the baby was doing. He even started sending me links to baby stuff, like cribs and car seats, asking for my opinion. Then came the baby shower. It was a small thing, just family and a couple of friends, but Jeff showed up, and so did his parents. And honestly, it wasn't as awkward as I thought it would be. Jeff was attentive, making sure I had everything I needed, and his parents were doting on me like they'd never stop caring about me, even after the breakup. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. At the end of the party, Jeff pulled me aside and said, "I think I need to see a therapist. About everything, my fears, my commitment issues, all of it. I want to be better for the baby and for you." I was floored. I mean, this was the same guy who used to joke that therapy was just paying someone to tell you what you already know. But he looked serious. And for the first time in a long time, I actually believed him. After the baby shower, things finally started to feel manageable. Don't get me wrong, it was still complicated. I mean, how could it not be? But for the first time in what felt like forever, it felt like Jeff and I were on the same page, or at least trying to get there. True to his word, Jeff started seeing a therapist. He didn't give me all the details, and honestly, I didn't expect him to. But every now and then, he'd casually mention something he'd learned or was working on. Like one day, he called me and said, "Do you think I have a habit of avoiding hard conversations?" And I just laughed because, yeah, buddy, that's kind of your whole thing. But the fact that he was even asking, that was huge. He also started making plans to move to Oregon, even if it was just temporarily, to be closer when the baby came. At first, I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I mean, it's not like we were getting back together, and the thought of him being a short drive away instead of a state away was a lot. But the more we talked, the more it felt like the right thing to do. He wasn't doing it to win me back or to fix things between us. He was doing it for the baby. And that meant a lot. Eventually, we sat down and had the conversation I'd been dreading for months. How we were going to co-parent. It was awkward and emotional, and there were definitely some tears, but we figured it out. We agreed to take things one step at a time. No rushing into anything, no unrealistic promises. Just a commitment to be there for our kid and to do what was best for them, even if it meant putting our own feelings aside. And that's where we're at now. Jeff moved to Oregon a few weeks ago, and we've been keeping things friendly. He's been super involved, coming to doctor's appointments, helping me set up the nursery, even learning how to install a car seat, which was honestly hilarious to watch. We're not together, and I don't know if we ever will be again, but for now, that's okay. What matters is that we're both showing up for this baby. And that's more than I ever expected when this whole mess started.